Afternoon, brothers and sisters. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to another Thursday webinar. It is a joy, a blessing to be with you again this evening. And I know that by the grace of our Lord, we will be blessed as we study together. So, thank you for joining me. It really is an encouragement week after week. I keep saying it because it's true. It is encouraging when we have these webinars and I see all of you joining me from so many different places. Just bow your heads with me as we seek a blessing on our study this afternoon. We appreciate the opportunity to be together again this evening, our dear Father, and to have the opportunity of studying your word once more. We always depend on you. We know that we have no wisdom, we have no ability to know anything, to do anything, to say anything on our own. And so we commit ourselves into your hands and pray that you will please bless us. Bring home to our minds the things that you want us to understand. We do know, Father, that we are living in the final moments of time. And I pray that as we share together, study together, you will help us to understand how we ought to relate to the things that are happening in the world at this moment. Thank you, Father, for hearing and answering this prayer. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, as I said, welcome again, everybody. One thing that I think all of us are probably certain about is that we are living in the final moments of time. I mean, some of the things that are happening, I'm sure they have something to do with the fulfillment of prophecy, but I'm not quite sure. I've been trying to understand about the king of the north and the king of the south. I've been trying to understand, the two-horned beast, which I believe to represent America in some kind of way. But at the same time, since the last election, since Donald Trump became president, all kinds of things have been happening, unexpected things, and it's like the whole world is being configured. So we're at a place where we don't know what is going to happen next. And somebody asked me recently about some questions relating to prophecy and how I understand America's part in that prophecy, and the best I could say is I'm just waiting to see until things begin to take a definite shape, because things are changing so fast. I'm sure that there's going to be some major reconfiguration taking place in the world, but we're at a place where at the moment we just have to wait and see, because things are happening in unexpected ways and at a very rapid speed. I just know that it's an amazing time to be alive. And I just want to encourage all of us to do as the Lord said. Look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draweth nigh. Sometimes I pause to try to imagine what it is going to be like when Jesus comes again. Sometimes I try. And, especially in earlier days, I used to dream about this. Daydream. I used to dream about this a lot. I used to lie on my back. Sometimes I would go outside and look at the stars at night and lie on my back, like on my roof, and I would imagine the coming of Jesus, and I would be lost in wonderment. It is something. It is something that we can talk about, we can dream about, but nothing will ever match the reality of that moment when we actually see the Lord. There is so much that we have never seen before, we have never known, we have only read about. What will it be on that day when the skies burst open and we see the Lord coming? The first time in the history of the universe that such an event has ever happened. And we looking up and seeing for the first and the last time the coming of the Lord, and we know that this is it, this is the end, it is over, and we made it. And what will it be? What will it be? I tell you, there will be no emotions. There will be no words to describe the emotions that we feel. And it's good to know, it's wonderful to know that we are in those final moments when we can expect these things to happen in our lifetime, I dare to say. Anyway, I'm just musing a little bit because we are going to continue our study this evening. Not even a study, like an examination, like an exploration. Maybe that's the better way to put it. An exploration of that sermon, that message that Jesus gave in response to his disciples' question. Now, last week, of course, we completed Matthew chapter 24. And maybe we could move on from there and look at something else. But before we do this, I want to look at the parallel passage in Luke, in the book of Luke. Like I said, I think I mentioned last week or the week before, there are 3 places where we have the same events described in the Bible. One of them is Matthew 24. The other one is in Mark chapter 13. And the other one is in Luke chapter 21. And I should mention that Luke kind of divides up the things that Jesus said. And he puts some of them in Luke 17. And most of it is in Luke chapter 21. What we find in the book of Mark is very, very close to what we see in the book of Matthew. Matthew and Luke are almost identical. And I don't know a lot about how the Bible was written and who did what, but scholars say that Mark probably wrote the first gospel, the book of Mark. Mark probably wrote it, and then Matthew took that information and expanded on it to write his version of the gospel. And of course they say that Luke definitely, absolutely got his gospel by reports that he heard from other people, because that is what he himself says at the beginning of his book, that he undertook to put these things together as he learned them from eyewitnesses. So we know that Luke's gospel is not the basis of an eyewitness, personal eyewitness. It's things that he learned from other disciples, from other people who knew Jesus, and he put it together in a book. And that's how we come with the Gospel of Luke. And this explains why Mark and Matthew are very similar, even though Mark is a much smaller book. But when you read something in Matthew and you find it in Mark, it tends to be very similar. When you go to the book of Luke, there are a lot of details that don't appear in Matthew or Luke, and sometimes the way things are expressed is different. We're talking about the same thing, but different words are used to express the same thing. Sometimes there's a report made of something that Jesus or somebody else said, and the words are different in Luke than in Matthew and Mark. And of course, as I was saying a couple of weeks ago, this is why I don't believe in what they call verbal inspiration. That is, that every word is inspired. I don't believe in this, because if every word was inspired, then whether Matthew told it or Luke told it, it would have to be exactly the same. But it's not exactly the same, because both of them are expressing the same truth, but they are using different words. And it's making the Bible, it's understanding the Bible in a reasonable, rational way, and not turning it into something superstitious. So the truth is there. God inspired the ideas and the thoughts, but the writers chose the words based on their vocabulary, based on it's like, of course, I might express something. My son Daniel may express the same thing, and we use two different words. I could say, Jesus said it was a beautiful evening. And he might say, Jesus stated that it was a wonderful afternoon. I said beautiful evening, he says wonderful afternoon. It's the same idea, but we are recalling that he said something good about the evening. He used a superlative expression, but he's using the words based on the idea in his mind, and I'm doing the same, but we are choosing different words. And we see this in the Gospels, because in one of them, we see this in many places. In one of them says that Jesus was wearing, at his crucifixion, they put a purple robe on him. Purple. And then somebody else said they used a scarlet robe. And I've seen skeptics, unbelievers, say that the Bible contradicts itself, because one said it was a scarlet robe, one said it was purple. And I could even compare that to the shirt I'm wearing, right? I'm wearing a red shirt. Somebody might say it's a scarlet shirt. Somebody else might say it's a crimson shirt. Scarlet, crimson, red. I mean, those are minor shades of difference. It's just how a person might express what he's seeing. So anyway, the point I'm making is that the book of Luke, when it comes to the sermon we have been looking at, Luke has some additional details. And because of this, I think it would be helpful if we look at Luke's version of the same message. All right, so this evening we're going to actually go to Luke chapter 21, and we will probably look at Luke chapter 17 also, to look at the statements that are made about the same thing that we read in Matthew. Now, hopefully, all of us were here for the past 3 weeks while we were going through Matthew 24, so hopefully we remember the details that were given. And so we should be able to pick up the things that are different in the book of Luke. A lot of similarity, but quite a number of differences too. And I believe that that information is important, so that is why I'm thinking we should go there and actually do that study, actually study that as well. So we will go to Luke chapter 21. And we find here, Luke 21 and verse 7, the same question. They asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things come to pass? You notice that if you look at the book of Matthew, and maybe I should really just bring up the book of Matthew in the right panel, so that we can actually compare as we go along. I know we did a little bit of this last week, but I think we can take a closer look. Just to reinforce the point I'm making, that the words are different. Look at what Matthew says the disciples asked. Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? In Luke it says they asked, but when shall these things be? All right, you have the same thing over here. When shall these things be? And then it says, and what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? But Matthew says it different. It says, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? So the question is worded differently. The meaning is very similar, but the wording is different, because we don't have verbal or word inspiration. Both of these writers are giving a report of what they have understood that Jesus said. And so the meaning is basically the same. but the wording is different. And when we understand this, it's helpful because we will encounter things like this in the Bible. And once we understand this principle, then we're not among those who become disillusioned and make foolish statements. All right, so pretty much it's the same. Take heed that no man deceive you. Many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ. And the time draweth near. Go not after them. Luke puts in this piece. And the time draweth near. Matthew doesn't say that. Luke goes on to say, when you hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified. Matthew says, you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. Luke says, terrified. Matthew says, troubled. Both of them say, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. All these things must come to pass, the end is not yet. They follow the same pattern. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Matthew says the same thing. Nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. Earthquakes, famines, pestilences in different places. Great earthquakes shall be in different places, famines and pestilence. Luke adds something. And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Now Matthew does not mention that at this point at all. Matthew only mentions these signs and these great events later on when he comes down to the end to talk about the actual coming of Jesus. That is when he mentions that the sun shall be dark and the moon shall not give her light and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Luke mentions this way down at the beginning, from when we are even talking about before the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Luke mentions that these things will happen. And the thing is, I could be wrong. But let me withdraw. I hear that. I understand. The historian Josephus actually says, and I think Ellen White was quoting from Josephus, said the same thing in the book The Great Controversy. But Josephus said that before the destruction of Jerusalem, the people saw images in the sky of chariots and of armies at battle. I'm not sure exactly how people saw this, whether it was the clouds making the formation or they actually had visions or whatever. But anyway, I suppose that this could be what Luke was referencing, but it's just interesting that he says this and Matthew doesn't say it until much later on. Anyway, they follow the same pattern because it goes on to say, before all these they shall lay their hands on you, persecute you, delivering you up to synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And that, of course, was what happened. Matthew just mentions that in passing. He says, then shall many be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. And Matthew goes on to talk about false Christ and false prophets. Now Luke puts in something that Matthew doesn't mention. He's more detailed in what he's saying. Because he says, don't think about what you are going to say when you are to give an answer. I will give you a mouth and wisdom which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay, to contradict, or to resist. And you shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolks and friends. And some of you shall they cause to be put to death. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. Now, I think actually what Luke is mentioning here is what we find in Matthew chapter 10. Jesus told them in Matthew 10 what would happen. Let me see if I can find it. In Luke chapter 10, on a different occasion, this is when Jesus was sending out the disciples to preach. He says, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils, and they will scourge you in their synagogues. I think this is what Luke is talking about. Luke put it here, but in actual fact, Matthew and Mark put it at a different place. Because he says, delivering you up to synagogues and into prisons. And Jesus says, you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony. And Luke says it here, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. At that time, Matthew says, when they deliver you up, take no thought how or what you shall speak. It shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. Luke says the same thing. And settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate what before you answer. Jesus says it. Take no thought how or what you shall speak. It shall be given you in that same hour what you shall speak. You shall be betrayed by parents, brethren, kinsfolks, and friends. He says, Matthew says, the brother shall deliver up the brother to death, the father the child. Children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. And you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. And Luke says the same thing. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. Now, it seems very clear to me, and if you are paying attention, you will see what I'm saying. Luke is talking about the sermon where Jesus told his disciples what they were to expect concerning the end of the world and the casting down of the temple. When Matthew made the statement here, in the right panel, when Matthew made these statements, Matthew was actually not speaking about the same event. In Matthew it says, when he had called unto him his 12 disciples, he gave them power against unclean spirits, to cast them out, to heal all manner of sickness and all manner of diseases. And it tells you that he sent out the apostles, and he told them to go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel and to preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And this is the time when he told them what would happen, how they would be delivered up to synagogues and brought before governors and kings, and how the brother would give up the brother and the parents turn against their children, and they would be hated of all men for his name's sake. And this is the point. Luke takes the same passage, the same message, and he drops it in right here at that point where Jesus is talking about the coming of Jesus, his return, and the end of the world. So it's clear Luke is giving you an account. If you've noticed, there's another point here that Matthew makes that Luke actually puts in. Jesus says, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. And Luke puts it in here, but there shall not an hair of your head perish. Not exactly the same words, but it's clearly Luke is referring to things that Matthew said in another place. Maybe he's not quoting from Matthew. He got his information, he gathered up information from different people. Whoever told him this might have connected it to the statement that Jesus made when he was talking to his disciples on that mountain. But actually, if you look at Matthew and Mark, it happened sometime previous. So Luke is giving the information, but he's putting it in different places because he wasn't actually there. He's taking bits and pieces from different people and he's putting them together. So the message is correct, and it could fit in this context. But if we want to be exacting and nitpicking and say he didn't actually say these words here, he said them somewhere else, then we could say that there is a difference between where Matthew put it and where Luke put it, but the message itself is the same. And I'm saying all of this because for me it's important that we should understand the truth about how the Bible was written and how it was put together. That way we can avoid a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. Now, here's another place. Now let's go back. So this was Matthew chapter 10, and Luke quoted from it when he was talking about this message that Jesus gave his disciples. So I would say that Luke actually got it in the wrong place, or not exactly where it wasn't exactly on that occasion that Jesus said it. Now, here's another place where there's a difference But this difference now helps us to understand better. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 24, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. That's Matthew 24. Go over to Luke 21 and look at what he says. In verse 20, when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies or surrounded with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Look what he says next. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let them that are in the countries enter, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. So he's at the same place where Matthew was when Matthew says, let them which are in Judea flee into the mountains. That's the point where we are. He says, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. Same thing. But Matthew says, it is when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel standing in the holy place. What is that? What does that mean? Luke explains it, because Luke says, when you shall see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know that the destruction is near, and those in Judea are to flee to the mountains. Daniel says, Matthew says, or Matthew quotes Jesus as saying, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So what Luke says helps us to understand what this abomination of desolation is. What did Jesus actually say? Did Jesus say the abomination of desolation, or did he say Jerusalem surrounded with armies? What words did he actually use? Well, in my mind, I think he probably said both things. Matthew remembered one part, and Luke was given a report of another thing, and both of them put them together. So Jesus could have said, when you see the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about, standing in the holy place, that is, when you see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, then you can know that the destruction is at hand. That's probably what Jesus said. Now Matthew gives you a part of it and Luke gives a part of it. So both writers put together complement one another and help us to understand. Because if we had just got Luke's report, we would not have known that this was the abomination of desolation. And if we had just gotten Matthew's report, we would not have known that this abomination consisted of Jerusalem being surrounded with armies. So they complement each other, as I said. But Luke makes it much more clear that we are talking about specifically the destruction of Jerusalem and what it is that Jesus was focusing on when he spoke about the abomination of desolation. So we can understand why he says that those who are in Judea should run to the mountains and get out of Jerusalem, and those who are in the country should not enter into Jerusalem. Jesus says, for these are the days of vengeance, that all things that are written might be fulfilled. And again Matthew gives you some, again Luke gives us some details that are not in Matthew. When Matthew spoke about it, Matthew says, pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation. Now, Luke does not mention great tribulation, but look at what Luke says. Look at what Luke says. There shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. This is the corresponding passage in the book of Luke. So we can see very clearly that this great tribulation that Jesus spoke about here refers to the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the first meaning. Now we believe that there's another great tribulation down at the end of time, and Jesus mentions this again. But he actually speaks of two great tribulations, as I pointed out last week, was it, or the week before. But Luke makes it clear that this tribulation mentioned here in connection with the destruction of Jerusalem is actually, yes, it's focused on Jerusalem's destruction. Because he makes it clear, it's referring to the time when they shall fall by the edge of the sword, they shall be led away captive into all nations. This is the destruction of Jerusalem. It's not the end time destruction, or not the end time tribulation, I should say. Now Luke makes a strange statement, and I have to admit that this statement, I don't have a clear understanding of it. I can express how some people understand it, and then I'll explain why I'm reluctant to accept those explanations. Let me put it that way. Luke says, "And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." That is one of the strange verses in the Bible. Now, I'm going to show you another passage in the Bible that seems to suggest, or seem to be highlighting the same event. But I'm pretty sure it's not, but it seems to be. It's in Revelation. Revelation chapter 11, it says, "There was given unto me a reed like unto a rod. The angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple, leave out and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot for 42 months. Now, I am fairly confident that what we see in Revelation has nothing to do with what we just read in the book of Luke. And why? Because I think Luke seems to be speaking of something literal. But I'm pretty sure that Revelation is speaking of something figurative. The holy city, for example, I don't think is referring to Jerusalem here on this earth. And the Gentiles, I don't believe is referring to genetic Gentiles, because in Revelation the Jews or the Israelites and the Gentiles are not genetic people. It's not to do with race. It has to do with your spiritual condition. So I think Revelation is focusing on a spiritual interpretation. But I just went here to look at it anyway to show you a similarity. Now, back to the book of Luke. What does this mean? Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. If you look at it literally and take it at face value, it seems to be saying that the city of Jerusalem is going to be taken over by the Gentiles. That is, the Romans conquered Jerusalem, and that the Gentile nations, the Romans first of all controlled Jerusalem, and then of course it was taken over by the Muslims, different Muslim nations, and they controlled Jerusalem. In actual fact, during the Dark Ages, the nations of Europe launched crusades to try to take back what they considered to be the holy city, to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. But of course, all of that never happened. Now, in the 1940s, what was it, 47? One of those years, in the 1940s, after World War II, the Germans, the English, they carved out a spot of land. They cleared a patch of land, and they gave it to the nation of Israel. They created a nation of Israel. Up to that time, the Jews were scattered all over, mostly in different European nations. And I think it was something called the Balfour Declaration, where the Of course, the British and the Americans, they won World War II. British and the Americans and the Allies, they won World War II, and they were in the process of dividing up the world according to their victory. And one of the things that the British, I don't remember if he was a prime minister or whatever, but he made a declaration, for that the Jews could return to this place that he had mapped out down there in the Middle East, where Israel used to be, including where Jerusalem was, and they were to return, and they were to be able to go back and reestablish their homeland down there in the Middle East, in Palestine. So that was the beginning of the modern nation of Israel. And, that has been a cause of unending conflict from those days until today. The Jews and the Palestinians have been in constant conflict. It has been a war zone almost unceasingly. So there are many people who believe that this was a fulfillment of the prophecy that Jerusalem would be controlled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles should be fulfilled. And so they say that in I think it was 47, I don't remember the exact year, but it's the 1940s, that at this time the Jews were returned to their homeland. They were returned to the control of Jerusalem. And most of the people who believe this, they see this as a sign that the time of the end had arrived. The time of the end had arrived. That is what they see. So this was in the 1940s, and today we're approaching 100 years further on. We're coming to 2040 something. It's nearly 100 years. What is the point of this verse? That's why I said I'm not sure, because I know for certain, I can say this with no apology or no hesitation, that the Jews are no longer and will never again be God's special chosen people. People look at the Bible and they look at statements in the Bible. I've come to understand that those statements have to be taken in context. They have to be understood based on the time in which they were made and other factors. But God never was racially biased. God never was racially biased. We might say he made a promise to Abraham. Of course he did. But later on, the Apostle Paul helps us to understand something far more reasonable, which is that the promise that God made to Abraham was a promise based on faith. The Jews, the Israelites, were at first a model or a type of these people of God. God used them as a model, as an illustration. But they were never God's people in the ultimate sense. They were only God's people in terms of the lesson book, the teaching tool. The real people of God always were the people of faith. And then when Jesus came now, that was openly and solidly brought into open display. That from that point on, God no longer regards flesh and blood people. God no longer is racially prejudiced. Whether you're black or you're white, red or you're brown or yellow or whatever color, the only thing that matters is your relationship of faith to the God of heaven. God was never racially biased. Same thing for the Jews. Whether you are from the nation of, you can trace your descendants, your ancestors. Whether you can trace your ancestors back to Abraham and Jacob and David or whatever, it means nothing in terms of your spiritual pedigree. So we can be absolutely certain that God does not regard the Jews as his special people. Do the Jews have some kind of head start? And I would say, yes, that's what Paul points out in Romans chapter 2. He says, what advantage then does the Jew have? And Paul makes it clear in Romans chapter 2. He says, much every way, because unto them were committed the oracles of God. And since I'm saying this, maybe I should just look at the verse so we can read it together. I know that when we read something together, it tends to stick more, and that I would like that to happen. So let me actually look at the verse in Romans and actually read where Paul says, what advantage then does a Jew have? Maybe it's chapter 3. Maybe I quoted the wrong chapter. So maybe it's a good thing. Yeah, I think it's chapter 3. Yeah, it's chapter 3. Paul says, maybe I can read it in a simple version, right? Let me go to the NIV. He says, what advantage then is there in being a Jew? Or what value is there in circumcision? He says, much in every way. There's a lot of benefit. But he says, first of all, the Jews have been entrusted with the very words of God. Now, this is the point that he's making. Because you have the word of God, because you have an understanding of the word of God, because your whole history has been focused on the word of God, you have a head start. That's the advantage. You have a head start. And what I mean by this, or what Paul means by this, is that, look, I was born in a Christian country. I was not born into Hinduism. I was not born into Islam or Buddhism. I had a great advantage from the moment I was born over people who were born in those countries, because, and not only this, I was born into a family where my parents were Christians. From the moment I was born, I was learning from the Bible. I was in a Christian atmosphere. I have a great advantage over those who are born in different circumstances. I have an advantage. I have a head start. I was predisposed from the moment I was born, or from I began to grow up. I was predisposed to believe in God and to believe in the Bible and to believe in religion, religious things. Now, granted, when I became a Christian, I went back and I examined everything closely for myself. I didn't want to be the victim of deception, so I tried my best over the years to examine everything that I believe as closely as I can. But I had an advantage. I had a head start. And that's what Paul is saying. That, and nobody can argue with that. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. It's very obvious. The Jews had a head start, and today they still have an advantage because they use the Old Testament. But of course, they have become very mixed up because they use the Talmud, and their tradition has set them against Christ, so they're almost at a disadvantage today. Those who are born in Christian circles are far better off than they are. But they still have an advantage over people like, let's say, those who are born into Hinduism or Islam, who are deeply steeped in non-Christian ideas. So what I'm saying is, when Matthew says, or when Luke says that Jerusalem would be trodden down of the Gentiles, people come to the conclusion that this means that Jerusalem is still a special place, and that the Jews are still special people, and that God has given the Gentiles a certain limited time, and God says, look here, you Gentiles can control Jerusalem, but it's my place, and I'm taking it back, and I'm giving it to my people, the Jews. That's how some people read this statement. And I'm saying that this statement is absolutely nonsensical. It's a marker. Yes, it's in the Bible. It's a marker. God is saying that you can look for the time when the Gentiles no longer are in control of Jerusalem. And this is a mark that we are coming to the end of time. I think that is what it is saying. But I would resist very strongly anybody who tries to say that this means that the Jews are still special. They are still special to God. And I would emphasize and highlight this, brothers and sisters, because one of the things that I am most jealous about, and I think every one of us should be the same, I'm jealous about the reputation and the character of our God. I'm jealous about the character of God. I want people to know that God is fair, and God is unbiased, and God is loving. God is not racially biased. I, like all of us here, I despise racial prejudice. I despise the idea of elitism on the basis of the color of my skin or my genealogy or just because I was born in a certain country. I despise those kinds of things. And I cannot, I absolutely will never believe God is like that. No. God loves all men equally, all races, all nations equally. Of course, those who accept him and receive him, those who accept his son, they are brought into a closer relationship with him. Absolutely, because they respond to his grace. But that does not negate the fact that it is faith that creates this relationship. It is not our genetic heritage. So, because of this, any suggestion, any interpretation of prophecy that makes one nation or one race or even one place special more than other places, I absolutely am completely against it. And I believe this is the principle. I am certain this is the principle of the new covenant. So I wanted to make that point very clear and as strongly as I can, because it is one of the things I feel most strongly about. So anyway, Luke is the only person who mentions this passage. It's not there in Mark or Matthew or John. It's not there anywhere else in the Bible about Jerusalem being controlled by the Gentiles until a certain time. It's kind of strange because Luke was not there when Jesus said it. And Luke was not one of the disciples of Jesus. He was actually a Gentile. Luke was not a Jew. He's the only person in the Bible who was not a Jew. He's the only writer in the Bible. Of all the many writers, I think about 40 of them, he's the only writer who was not a Jew. So he got his information from other people, and it's interesting that he puts in this statement. He must have learned it from somebody. Nobody else mentioned it. So it's interesting, very interesting. But anyway, so he gives us a marker, and he says that, and actually this is an interesting marker because what it covers a certain gap. Now we said that in the book of, in the record of Matthew, in Matthew's record, let's go back to Matthew. Yeah, in Matthew's record, it jumps from the destruction of Jerusalem, talks about the destruction of Jerusalem, and then it jumps straight over to the coming of Jesus. There's a gap. And it's interesting because I think this statement by Luke covers that gap. So, they shall fall by the edge of the sword, they shall be led away captive into all nations. That's the destruction of Jerusalem. And then now, it says, Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So, what it says is that, okay, Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. And then there's going to be a long gap. There's going to be a long gap. Actually, it's almost 2,000 years. And during that big gap, Jerusalem is going to be controlled by non-Jews. And then there's a certain point in time when the control of the Jews will be returned. The control of the Gentiles is going to be overthrown. They will no longer control the city of Jerusalem. Now, this does not mean that Jerusalem is special. It does not mean Jerusalem is favored by God. It's just a sign. It's just a mark. God is saying, all right, those of you who are, or Jesus is saying, God saying through Jesus, those of you who are looking for the prophecy and trying to understand the prophecy, there will be, after the destruction of the temple, there will be a long gap, and during that time, the city of Jerusalem is going to be controlled by Gentiles. It's something you can look for. It doesn't mean God is doing it or God is in favor. It's like a prophecy of something you can look out for. And then he says, when you can see the Gentiles are no longer in control of Jerusalem, then we can say the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, because he's saying God has made it so that the Gentiles will control it for a certain time. So when this time is no longer valid, when the time is finished, and you see that the Gentiles don't control Jerusalem anymore, what can we know? Well, I think what he's saying is that we can know that we have come down to the last point in time. To be honest, even as I'm discussing it here, I'm kind of formulating a little better in my mind. Remember at the beginning I said that I am not very clear about this prophecy. But I think I'm even understanding it a little better as we go through it here now. And I think this is what I can conclude, that it's really just an event-based prophecy that tells us when we can have an idea that we have now come to the last part of the prophecy. The first part took us up to the destruction of Jerusalem. Then we had the gap when Jerusalem is under the control of the Gentiles. Then you have the end of the gap when the Jews come back in control of Jerusalem. And now we have come to the last part of the prophecy when we are going to see it fulfilled. That is what I'm seeing as I'm looking at this, and that makes it more interesting. Because the next thing he says is that now, after this, in verse 25, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars. Yes, definitely. Now we have come to the end time portion. And upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now I think this is a good description of where we are. I could even read verse 26. It says, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Now, we are actually, I believe, at verses 25 and 26. The last part of verse 26 is just before us. The powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So, this is before us, but I think we are here now, where it says, there shall be sign in the sun, in the moon, in the stars. And that has not yet been completely fulfilled, because the sun is to be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, the stars are to fall. But some parts of it we can see, like it says, upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. There is war constantly among the nations, and there are difficulties and problems. They talk about global warming, they talk about different things, diseases, all kinds of things, pandemics, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. I think this is not yet even absolutely fulfilled, because I think the fearsome things that will happen are to become of a greater and a more terrible nature. But definitely now, Luke has taken us down to the last moments of time. And I'm seeing what I never saw this before. It's like it's clear to me at this moment, which I didn't see before. It is clear that the connection between the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of time is this statement about Jerusalem being trodden down until the times of the Gentiles. So I would say that the times of the Gentiles would refer to that period between both times of trouble. The destruction of Jerusalem is the beginning of the times of the Gentiles. And the taking of Jerusalem by the Jews, again, marks the end of that period, that gap. That dark ages gap comes to an end at that point. And now we can look for the end time signs. Now we can look for the coming of Jesus. I think that's what he's saying. Now that has been nearly 100 years ago, not quite, maybe 80-something years. And so that further intensifies the conclusion that we are living in the end of time. I'm going to stop here, and we will continue next week. We'll continue next week with this this chapter. And you will recognize that there are a lot of little details in the book of Luke, a lot of little details in Luke's narrative that are not in Matthew. and are not in Luke, are not in Mark. What is probably the most interesting thing is this particular statement about the times of the Gentiles. I am not sorry that we decided to look at this today, because it has really brought some ideas to my mind, some thoughts to my mind that were not there before, and I'm grateful that we looked at it today. So I think it has been helpful. But we're going to stop here for today, and we will pick up again next week at that verse. So I want to just express my appreciation again. I'm always saying that, but it's because it's always true. My appreciation for those of you who joined me this evening. Always such a pleasure. Brother Juan Carlos, Sister Zadie, Brother Alexander, Brother Oliver from Ghana, Sister Anita, Brother Wayne, Brother Dixon managed to be with us again this evening. It's good to see you, Brother Dixon. I'm glad that you could have been here this evening. Sister Sylvie, Brother Florian, Brother Patrick, Brother Kip. Brother Kip says, I've been listening to the Mother of All Wars again. Good for you, Brother Kip. I really think that the Lord took us through that series of studies, and I probably need to go back and listen to it again myself, because it's something I wish everybody would listen to. It gives us a good understanding of the pattern of these end times. Brother Terence, good to see you. Brother Owen, Sister Angela, Sister Suzanne, Brother Michael from Germany, Brother Roydell, Sister Chris. Wonderful to know you're having a beautiful day. You're over that terrible cold that you were passing through recently. Praise the Lord. Sister Sharon is here. Sister Jess. That's Sister Jess from Tennessee. Good to see you as always. Brother Matt, Sister Marjorie, Sister Nikki, Sister Beth, Brother Elton. Greetings in South Africa there also, Brother Elton. Sister Ellen, Sister Jill, Sister Jess, this time Sister Jess from Canada, Sister Sonia, Sister Dario, Sister Arthia, Brother Chanel, blessings to you too. Sister Kathleen, glad you could make it. Greetings there in Guam. Brother Mike, blessings. That's Brother Mike from Trinidad. Brother Mike, I didn't respond to your voice note yet. Please forgive me. I put it off and I forgot, but I'll get to it as soon as this meeting is over. Sister Loy, Brother Dragon and others, Brother Bikang, Brother Flavius, God bless you too. Brother Wayne said he thought I was wearing an orange shirt. Right, so if this were in the Bible, somebody would say it was a red shirt, somebody would say it was orange, somebody would say it was scarlet, maybe. Sister Martha, good to see you, Joe and Martha. All right, from New York, good to see you again. Oh, Sister Judy, all right. I saw this name Judy Ann, and I had no idea it was Ralph and Judy. I miss you guys. It has been a long time, couple of years since I haven't heard from you. So it's wonderful to know that you are here. And I don't know if you remember, one year you gave me a bag to give to my grandson. It was like maybe 5 years ago. He had no value for the bag, but I put it down, and now 1 year ago, he saw the bag and asked me, can I have this bag? And he didn't even know it was his. So he was ready for it. So now he's carrying the bag with him everywhere he goes. So I just want to remind you, Sister Judy, your gift of many years ago is finally at the right owner, and it is much appreciated. All right, Brother Colin, Sister Destiny. Glad you can stay awake this evening, Sister Destiny, or morning. I don't know what time it is where you are. Brother Francisco, Sister Zem. None good but God. God bless you, my brother. Brother Kip is reminding me that the Jews went back to Jerusalem in 1948. That's right. Okay, thanks, Brother Kip. Brother Matt, good to see you. Brother Matthew from England. But I keep saying that 2028 will be 80 years since they went back. So I don't know. I'm going to be looking more closely at that situation now from now on. Good to see you, Brother Leonard. All right, Brother Terence, I'll look at that invitation. Sister Anna, good to see you. Daniel, good to see you. All right, Sister Judy, blessings. 4 a.m. for Sister Destiny, so I guess you're just about to get off your work schedule. All right, God bless you and keep you, not only you, but everybody else in the room. I enjoyed the fellowship this evening. Thank you for being with me. I say once again for the last time, I'll see you all next week. And I might have the privilege of seeing some of you tomorrow evening for the fellowship meeting, and then on Sabbath. All right? God bless and take care. Love and appreciate you all.